The lure of easy money. Your money for nothing and your chicks for free. Morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Monday. Peel yourself off the mat edition of Bury Your Bookie, where we get to do a little bit of post-race handicapping. I'm Jeff DeForrest. Very happy to have you with us for this edition of the show. Our handicappers will be joining us all throughout the week. We'll be with you again Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with all kinds of steam and information. I'm sure the focus will be the opening round of the college football playoffs, which are interesting at the very least from a number of standpoints. And we'll cover that. We have a couple of Monday Night Football games tonight. One practice in gambling that I absolutely used to despise is you're at the racetrack. I've been a racetrack guy my entire life. My very first experience with actual gambling, putting money on things, goes all the way back to when I was a 9-year-old in Brooklyn, New York. And we were betting, I guess I was 10 at the time. We were betting on the World Series between the Yankees and the Pittsburgh Pirates. Yeah, it was 60. So I was 9 years old. 1960 World Series. We all know what happened there. Game 7, Bill Mazeroski. There's a long fly ball to deep left field. And I was halfway to Queens because I was in loser leaves town type of circumstances, as my buddy Richie D'Angelo and I had booked all the bets against the New York Yankees. If the Pirates had lost that World Series, I literally probably would have lived my entire life in Costa Rica or something. I didn't know anything about that then, but I was on the Myrtle Avenue elevated train on my way as far as the train would take me because I was never going to be able to pay off the bets that we had booked. And then Maz's home run leaves Forbes Field, and I'm thinking, thank fucking God, I'm safe. And maybe you've had that experience, but one of the worst things after going to the racetrack all of my lifetime is when some schmuck comes up to you and they want to show you their losing tickets. Oh man, I left out the 4 in the third position, or I would have hit the superfecta for 29,000. And they're shoving these tickets in your face. Now you're incurring and suffering from your own losing ways. The last thing you want to do is have any empathy and no sympathy whatsoever you would have for some guy that is betting crazy shit. Superfectas, hectafectas, pentafectas, whatever they can come up with. There are a million ways now that have been devised to help separate you from your money. But as much as I thought that was an awful practice and the last thing I wanted to experience, I find it fucking fascinating now that people, and they're sticking a phone in your face and they're saying, look at this. I had a 10-team parlay and I lost with the 76ers and I hit the other 9 and I ended up losing. Once in a while, you'll have somebody show you a winning ticket on those premises, and okay, great. So the guy bet $20, picked up 2,300. That's fantastic. But if you're duped in, the reason that these organizations like FanDuel and all of the various betting sites, and we've talked about this many times on the show, are doing so phenomenally well is because people are betting small amounts of money in search of a giant payoff, essentially betting lottery tickets. And as much as I was horrified when I would see some schmuck with bad breath come up to me and you're thinking, did you have to eat that raw onion on your hamburger as they're sticking the tickets in your face? I sort of love it when they start showing me the stuff on their phone and say, look at that. I can't believe it. I had 9 out of 10. I only lost $30. And you're thinking, wow, they're building towering properties in Las Vegas based on this now, as opposed to the guy that used to come in there. Nobody wants the whales around anymore. They all want the small bettor that's betting 10 and 12 component parlays. Now, if you are betting, and there's a lot of stuff to get to on the show today because we have a recap, and this ties in with the post-race handicapping. Everybody's brilliant after the fact. And it's one of the things I enjoy about coming your way on Mondays because we get to already do some handicapping, post-race handicapping with the results well known to us. But we'll get into some of that. If you are betting, though, and there are a couple of Monday night games tonight, the bowl season is already underway with one game in the books and then another one coming up tomorrow. Got the Boca Bowl here in South Florida on Wednesday, all nondescript games of little consequence. And the big trick there is all of our handicappers have been telling you who the hell is playing. Well, we really don't know yet, and you might not know until post time. There may be some late scratches at the gate, and so that could determine the outcome of the game and maybe swing it by anywhere from 1 to dozens of points. So be careful. Tread very lightly there unless you have inside information. If you do or if you don't, it doesn't matter. If you are betting, BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action, the ability to watch the game, bet on things as they take place. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, and college basketball, NHL, UFC, boxing, head to BetOnline today. Don't forget to use the promo code, and this is going to gain you a lot of leverage. Don't forget to use the promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV, all caps, BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, many things transpired over the weekend. We did have a full slate of NFL games for the most part, except for the two that are on tap tonight to complete what would be Week 14 already of the National Football League season, 2024 season. We had a lot of hand-wringing and anxiety expressed here in town. Show I do early in the morning. You can catch it on South Florida Live. Just Google the Defo Show. And an old partner of mine here on NoFilter.net, the great Mike Lubitz, and I analyzed essentially what was going on in the local area. Now, for years, and I probably did about 40-plus years of radio and television here in the South Florida area, and we used to feature a thing, and it's been very, very prevalent for the last 20 years. It was called Dolphins Crying Towel, as people would call in, and this was the trend in sports talk radio. I always thought it was better if your teams all lost. Subliminally, I was rooting for all of the local teams to lose every game because it made the shows easy to do. People would call in, you just go through the phone lines. Okay, Joe, you're on line one. Joe from Jamaica. And he would call in and go, can you believe this, guys? Everybody ought to get fired. This is pathetic. So we had a lot of that earlier this morning with the Dolphins and the Texans because, and I feel terrible. I should have an omelet on my face because I had recommended to everybody before the season. And we don't back off. It's not like I'm going to tell you now, hey, we were right all along when we were dead wrong. If we buried you instead of your bookie, we're more than willing to fess up to that and admit to it. And I actually thought that the Miami Dolphins under Mike McDaniel, and despite the fact that everybody wants to see Chris Greer run out of town, the general manager of the Miami Dolphins, I actually thought that they were viable contenders at 2-1 to win the AFC East. So where's that at, DeForrest? That went out the window seemingly a while back, and it wasn't just related to Tua Tagovailoa's fourth or fifth concussion. Might be three, but exaggerating to make a point. And Tua came back, and he was looking like Drew Brees until this week, completing about 75% of his passes. I believe he had gone almost 200 throws, or maybe even in excess of that, without throwing an interception. And the Dolphins, still with faint playoff hopes alive, went to Houston yesterday at 6-7, clearly needing to win that game to stay in any kind of contention. Although, isn't it annoying when you see the graphic, and I put this up all the time whenever they're discussing the results of games on any of these post-game shows, in the hunt? I mean, are these guys in the hunt? This is a wild fucking goose chase for the Miami Dolphins at 6-8. They need so many things to happen, a series of miracles, the likes of which we haven't seen since Jesus was able to feed a bunch of, thousands of people on, a piece of fish. It was incredible. But, they would need a series of miracles to make it to the postseason. And you would have to say that those results are entirely catastrophic. They put all of this money into several offensive players. They gave Tua the extension that people were a little bit frightened by. They gave Jalen Waddle a bunch of money, and perhaps that was well-deserved because a guy making like $100 million now with most of it guaranteed in the NFL is almost pedestrian, is it not? And of course, Tyreek Hill, well-deserving of whatever he was being paid for the sensational couple of seasons he had in a Dolphin uniform, has not, however, been the same. And I blame the Dade County Police partially for the collapse of the Miami Dolphins. Never mind Chris Greer's ineptitude at putting together an offensive line over the last many years that he's been in the GM position. But when they slammed Tyreek Hill in that traffic dispute outside of Hard Rock Stadium before the Dolphin season was too far underway, I guess this was like the second or third game, he has not been the same player since. Wrist problems, and has not been the imposing factor that he was, the overwhelming influence that he was on games that he has been in the past. Now Tua all of a sudden reverts back to throwing balls that invoke the infield fly rule. Yeah, it's up there, and the runners can go at their own risk. He's throwing these balls way up in the sky. He's great when he throws those little darts on the 15-yard slants and the outs and all of the short patterns that he's brilliant at completing. But when he starts to throw the ball long, all of a sudden we're looking at hang time, and it literally hung the Dolphins up yesterday. All that being said, Houston at 9-5 has an ugly and unfortunate tendency to just hang around. I mean, you talk about a horse that is hanging in the stretch. Hang on there, please, hang on. And the horse is hanging like a rat. That's been the Houston Texans this year, which would compromise my belief that they actually were championship caliber material, even though it does appear that they are destined to make the postseason. Miami, however, you would have to think is out. And there's been a lot of kvetching and moaning, and we were doing an edition of Dolphins Crying Tale today. And it's unfortunate. I guess if I was going to pinpoint one thing as to what happened to the demise of the franchise, and it's been 20 years of suffering at least. It doesn't go as far back as the New York Jets, where their last big game was 1969. And we'll get into the Jet game a little bit in a moment here, because that was a mathematical permutation that seemed to be impossible for them to cover the 3.5 points I was laying in that particular contest as they took on the inept Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville barely triumphant over the Tennessee Titans, worst team against the spread in the AFC, with a 4-10 record now after yesterday's loss. But they beat the Titans 10-6. No reason to believe that the Jets, whose offense was showing slight signs of life, we're going to fall in that spot, but it looked like it could happen for a long period of time. And then all of the dynamics of that game changed, and it became a win and a cover for the New York Jets. In this Dolphin game, that was not the case. As horrendous as the Dolphins have played, 4 turnovers in a ball game, 3 at the time that they were trailing 20-12. With about 2 minutes to go in the contest, they get the ball back, and you're asking yourself, can they do it just, as Sam Retigliano would say, one time? One time. Can they possibly rally and win a game? They did it against the Jets the week before, took the game into overtime with a last-second field goal, and then eventually won and got their backers a push as they covered the 6 points by scoring a touchdown on the initial drive. Another Michigan rule that should be changed in the National Football League to make it more equitable for teams that do make it and opt to go into overtime. You don't want to put yourself in such a precarious position. We saw that in the Commanders game against the New Orleans Saints, where the Saints are dead in the water this year, have a horrible record and a really, really poor season. And they go for 2 at the end because what the hell? They had nothing to lose. And there was always a possibility they were going to kick the ball off to Washington. Commanders go right down the field, score. And they never touched the ball, sniffed the ball in overtime. A gross inequity that needs to be adjusted. But in this Dolphin game, Tua throws another pick. Tyreek Hill is battling for a ball down the field, and that's it. That put the final dagger in their back, the nail in their coffin. And people are wondering, and we spent a lot of time speculating on this earlier this morning on our show. And as I said, you can Google the Defo show and catch that if you'd like. It goes off every morning at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And if you're a fan of South Florida sports especially, I think you'll really enjoy it. And the question is, I mean, who needs to go? That's always the question. I'm sure many people around the National Football League cities and people that are fans of the NFL, even if you're in some remote bastion of Montana, are sitting there, whatever team you root for, and saying, hey, somebody's got to go. Now, that speculation has been Chris Greer, the general manager, for a while. Mike McDaniel has come into question, the hip-hop coach that we have. 3 years now with the Miami Dolphins, and it looks like, at best, I mean, if they go on a big run, they're going to finish 9-8. Mediocrity defined with a capital M. Another 9-8 season in spite of this huge investment that owner Stephen Ross made in those 3 players that we mentioned, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill. He also paid Jalen Ramsey, probably well-deserved because he's one guy that brings it to the table every week, Jalen Ramsey, the safety for the Miami Dolphins. But those 3 offensive players have not provided the same Nick Wallenda-type electrifying act that we'd seen develop early last year. Remember, they put up 70 on the Denver Broncos in week number 2, and everybody was saying, when you say Miami, we're talking Super Bowl, which is an excerpt from probably the dumbest team theme song that, and they ripped it off from the Houston Oilers on top of it. Dumbest team theme song that I've ever heard. But the fingers, I think, would have to be pointed directly at Chris Greer, who for some reason across his many years in the front office has been unable to assemble any kind of an offensive line that has any impact. They did go through that big strip down where they got rid of a couple of top-notch offensive linemen, including Laramie Tunsil. They passed on Penei Sewell when they had a chance to draft him. And so they've been decimated at offensive line for a long time. But the other unfortunate tendency of Chris Greer, the general manager of Miami, is his fascination with crippled defensive players like Bradley Chubb. I mean, you can't get better this way. So we apologize for asserting earlier in the season that Miami might be a good bet. I don't know that we were alone in this to possibly dethrone Buffalo atop the AFC East. We knew the Patriots were going to stink, and the Jets have been overbet all season long, although they may have a favorable record against the spread in spite of their ineptitude and the fact that Aaron Rodgers, though showing some signs of life, does not look like the kind of guy that you would trade massive numbers of draft picks and players for and then pay $60 million a year or whatever he's getting to produce the kind of results he has, which is a no-show in season number one due to an injury, and then a very subpar season by his standards so far this year. But yeah, that would have to be the thing, and that's what everybody's fetching about as Miami fell out of contention and in embarrassing fashion once again with 4 turnovers against the Houston Texans. I don't know that distinguished the Texans as being anything so great, but nonetheless, that was one result that was rather favorable for me and maybe unfavorable for the local fans here in the city we originate from, South Florida. Now, the other thing that happened, how many times have you been in this situation, people, where you're doing the math and you're trying to figure out how the fuck can I cover a point spread here? I was handed the Jets. I didn't really care which way this game was going to go prior to being handed the Jets in a personal bookmaking venture I have with a friend of mine. And I have the Jets minus 3.5. Now, if I was inclined to bet that game, I probably would have gone ahead, as I said earlier, and taken a shot with the Jets laying 3.5. Although the dagger, as we've often mentioned, hangs and hovers over your ass like a sword of Damocles. And so that hook was going to be particularly devastating because it looked like it took you out of the equation to get a push in the game. Jacksonville's ahead by 5. The Jets come back, not only get the touchdown, but the necessary 2-point conversion to put you in a position to at least bail out if you were laying 3 with a field goal to win the ball game. And they come back and they're up 3 points. Jacksonville comes back and ties it late. And that was fortunate, where you might have been satisfied with the Jets up 3. I certainly wasn't because I still needed to cover the hook. So you're actually now rooting against your team. And this is great, the fickle nature of being a degenerate. You're rooting for Jacksonville to come back and tie the game, which would put pressure on the Jets to get a score with about, I think they got the ball with a little under 2 minutes to go in a game. And instead, they have pressure to go ahead and put a touchdown on the board. So now there's a remote possibility you're going to cover this point spread. Devontae Adams, who had a monster game, he breaks a play down the sidelines. Looked like he's going to score. You're leaping off the couch in ecstasy, thinking, wow, how did I get out of this? It seemed mathematically impossible. And he's 1 yard short of the goal line. So now you're wondering, what the hell will the strategy be? We saw this Dellingham, and we talked about it at length a couple of weeks ago on a show when Dellingham had Arizona State knocking on the door. They were already up a score in the game and had a chance to make it a 2-score proposition with little time left on the clock. And Dellingham and his infinite wisdom, this is a guy candidate for Coach of the Year. He makes one of the stupidest fucking blunders I've ever seen, I still see it in horror. He has his quarterback start running backwards instead of just kicking the ball into the end zone with all the momentum on his side against BYU. And instead of just knocking it in for the score and making it a virtual impossibility that BYU could come back in this game, he decides that he's going to get cute, has the quarterback drop back 20 yards, get tackled, has the quarterback drop back another 15 yards and get tackled. Flag is thrown, and the next thing you know, he's given up the ball at like the 50-yard line to BYU, and they almost won the game outright and knocked their way, and knocked Arizona State out of the championship picture and out of the college football playoff as they completed the better part of a Hail Mary, only to have the receiver be tackled at the 2-yard line. Otherwise, they lose the game, and Dellingham looks like a fool. Maybe even that's a fireable offense at that point. So the Jets are now in need of, a field goal wins the game if they evaporate the time off the clock. But Jacksonville has 2 timeouts left, which naturally they're going to use. So if you took a knee, they're still going to get the ball back if you opt to go for the field goal. And in my opinion, just too many damn things can go wrong if you're going to lean on a field goal to close out the game. I don't care how short range it is. We've seen so many of those kicks missed, extra points missed, short field goals missed, blocked at the end of ball games, mid-range field goals blocked at the end of games. Kansas City has benefited from that. We've seen the Chiefs benefit from all kinds of crazy things at the end of games, including blocked field goals. We've seen the Bears lose games in that fashion. I mean, so many things can go wrong. Why would you subject yourself to that if you were a coach? Now, this Ulbrich doesn't seem to be the brightest knife and sharpest knife in the drawer, does he? Certainly not the brightest bulb out there when it comes to game day coaching. He makes Robert Saleh, who was canned after going 2-3, look almost like Lombardi in his decision-making leading up to this game. But fortunately for the bettors out there that were laying 3 and a hook with the Jets, he is not taking the advice that was being spewed out by whoever the color commentator was. What kind of nutbag is this? Talk about irresponsible news reporting and speculation. Color commentator saying, well, you know what they should do here? They should take 3 knees and then kick the field goal. And I'm thinking, fuck you. They ought to knock this thing into the end zone, force Jacksonville, in spite of having 2 timeouts, to score a touchdown. And you know what? If they come back and score a touchdown and tie the ball game up, then you got screwed because your defense couldn't hold them. Just knock the ball into the end zone, which they did. So they ended up giving the ball back to Jacksonville with about 1:08 to go. Jacksonville did nothing with it, essentially. And the Jets ended up prevailing and rewarded their backers with a win and a cover. But a wild day all the way around in the National Football League. I can't believe it, week 14 pretty much in the books. And if you're trying to get even, tread carefully. We did have our immediate premature evaluation, our early perusal pick of Cincinnati. Didn't that look like it was very favorable? Cincinnati laying 5 against the Tennessee Titans. You can go back and look at the videotape. Well, we were all over that one. So that turned out very well for us also. Now, interesting, too, the weekend started out with the Army-Navy game, which normally is a no-watch proposition for me. We were talking with the professor about this on Friday's show, and he's saying the only way, and is this on American people? Maybe I should just sit here and hum the national anthem while we do it. Because it's un-American not to like the Army-Navy game for some reason. And yet, I couldn't stand it for years. I mean, these 2 little high school offenses that they run, the triple option, who wants to see that? Throw the damn ball, as Keyshawn Johnson would say. Throw me the damn ball. Now, the amazing thing about Army and Navy over these many years is we have all of these people that are just stud military people that could go into battle in any country in the world, and you feel confident they're going to win. So how do they have thousands of people enrolled in Annapolis, Maryland, and at West Point, and they can't find one guy that can throw the ball in any given season? That area has improved a little bit, but I was reading some analysis by a guy named Doug Kazarian, and he was saying in spite of these overwhelming numbers where the game has gone under, there are a few games and a few events that you could consider as a degenerate, a gift from the gambling gods, where it's like accepting an annuity. And they say, oh, yeah, I didn't know Uncle Harry was rich. And now you've got an annuity coming your way. NBA All-Star Game, the over and that was always an annuity. Now they're making numbers that are so sensationally high that it becomes a little bit prohibitive. And yet I would imagine, I'm thinking, and I did no research on this, but I'm thinking it goes over every year no matter what. When the NHL actually played some semblance of a game as part of their All-Star game, I don't even know how to define the NHL All-Star activities now, but they don't actually play a game anymore. But that was a given also. They could put the over-under at 15 goals, and because they weren't playing any defense, Gretzky would have 5, and the game would routinely be 10-9 in favor of one side or the other. And you were able to go to the window and cash your ticket. It was an annuity. It was a given. It was one of the rare times that you could not lose. And that's kind of been the case with this Army-Navy game. As you look at the numerology on this, in the past 18 games, the under was 16, 1, and 1. In the last 18 meetings between Army and Navy, the under was 16, 1, and 1 under. And you had every reason to believe that this would be another example of that, as the over-under number was 39 and a hook, I think, at post time. And this Kazarian guy was saying, hey, look, first of all, combined over-unders, the Army and Navy, the service academies were 14-9 to the over this year. So there was a favorable trend. And the other thing that you looked at is that, I mean, these two teams very adept at practicing against that offense, but at the same time, they were not as inept throwing the ball. There weren't a lot of passes going to be thrown, and there were going to be few possessions. But in this case, he made a very strong case for betting the over. And that turned out to be very profitable for a lot of people because, and it's rare that these public handicappers are right. I was looking at a couple of things from yesterday. Somebody recommends you take Seattle. They're buried right out of the chute. Hung in there for a little while, but when Gino went down, they appeared to have no chance. They bring in, what was that, Bailey Howell they brought in? The ex-Celtic to quarterback the team. He's been in the grave for a long time. So you realize there that if you were a Seattle backer, and there was reason to believe in Seattle, they are at home. Their defense has been tenacious all year long. It seems to be getting better. And Geno Smith, as much as he was maligned when he was quarterbacking the New York Jets, has not been half bad in Seattle. He can sling the rock. He makes his share of Jameis Winston-like mistakes, but in general, and he can run with the ball when he gets in trouble. Seattle would have seemed to have been somewhat live against the Green Bay Packers in that ball game last night, but the Packers come out and just absolutely shred the Seattle Seahawks early in the game, and then hung on rather easily to cover the 3 points that they were laying. But this Army-Navy game, that was a compelling reason to watch, and that was if you took a chance there with the over, and you ended up cashing a nice ticket on that one because as improbable as that was, as much as it defied all the previous trends, have to give credit to Kazarian. He pointed out some very valid reasons why you might take a shot and figure there was going to be some scoring in this game. Now, well, most of it was done by Navy, as the final outcome was 31-13. So it wasn't like they destroyed the number, but 44 points, or rather, 44 points in the game versus 39 on the hook. And we're dancing in the streets. We do have, and coming up later on this week, we will be getting into the college football playoff games. I don't know if anybody's overwhelmingly excited about these ball games that are on tap. We have one in the book so far. The underdog prevailed there as South Alabama failed to cover the point spread in their game as they and the salute to veterans game that they prevailed over West Virginia, 30 or Western Michigan rather, 30-23. They were laying 8.5 Southern Alabama, so you ate it there if you were backing the chalk, and that may be something that you want to take a look at throughout the bowl season. You do have another relatively insignificant one coming up tomorrow, and that would be Memphis and West Virginia, and then here in South Florida on Wednesday, you have more to whet your appetite on the bowl season with Cal taking on UNLV. Not a bad matchup. They're both of these teams are schlepping all the way from the East Coast. The games tonight, I don't know what to do with these two games, to be honest with you. We've been pretty accurate on our selections, as tepid as they've been in the Monday Night Football games. But a doubleheader tonight, I'm not a big fan of that because it's impossible to follow the two games unless you're at a sports bar. It's a school night, as they say, for a lot of people. They're still actually feigning that they're working this next week before we get into the Christmas week when nobody gives a shit about anything from that point through the end of the year. But on tap tonight, you have a couple of games, and wow, a very, very ugly feeling that I have about both of these games. As you got the Vikings hosting the Bears. Bears have been very suspect this year. They already fired their coach. They did not get the traditional infusion of enthusiasm and a boost in overall play from the interim coach coming in. They got pounded last week. They take on a Vikings team that's come back to the pack a little bit in spite of their record. They have been vulnerable. And can the Bears be within 7? Is that a lot of points to lay? You were asking yourself that with the Ravens game against the Giants yesterday. 16 points. You were getting an enormous spread to cover for the Baltimore Ravens, and they did just that. In fact, I was looking in my New York Post at the report card for the New York Giants in that game. I always love when they do that. They assign a grade: offense, defense, special teams, coaching, this, that, and the other thing. And it looked like my college transcript. It really did. It was like F, F, C, F, F. But obviously, I was spending too much time, in one course when I was in school, and the Giants have been spending too much time flat on their back. Even Tommy Cutlets, concussed, had to leave the ball game. They ended up with Boyle, who was here and demonstrated he couldn't play in the NFL anymore, and maybe never could to begin with when he was with the Miami Dolphins, and they ended up getting pounded and annihilated in that particular ball game. So that was a lot of points to lay. Is 7 too much for the Vikings against the Bears? I'd probably go ahead and take the 7 points, but I wouldn't make that a very strong recommendation. And the Falcons, that line has jumped. I guess we find out that the Raiders, of course, without their outstanding pass rusher in the ball game, that's a huge differential. So that line went from 4 to 5 and a hook. And the Falcons have also been subpar in the last several games. A lot of questions about Kirk Cousins. Should he even be starting anymore? He seems to have badly regressed. But I wouldn't know what to tell you about that one, except originally my thought was everything you have against the Raiders in virtually every ball game, in spite of the fact that they are at home. We do have one final thing to address here on the program, and this is a practice we may have to suspend. And as I said, we own up to our losses. When we get trounced, we're more than willing to go ahead and admit it. 888 admit it. My mother used to call me all the time when she was alive and say, Jeff, can you call me back? Here's my number, 888 admit it. I'm like, Ma, I know that's not your number, but I understand what you're trying to do is, get me off of this sordid path that I've been on since, as I said, I was 9 years old and I was booking bets against the Yankees in the 1960 World Series. But we gave out a horse based on a tip, and once again, a tip horse goes up in just a wild, not even smoke. We're talking about a wildfire in California. We gave you Tarabella in the 8th race Friday at Oaklawn Park. And Tarabella ran more like Clarabella, the clown of the same name, and buried us. And I immediately texted my friend who had given me a couple of other horses who I have never taken advice from before, although I'd seen him around the racetrack many, many times. And I gave him what is a standard moniker for us, and that is LMN, lose my number. Now, you may be thinking the same thing, but if I were you, I would stick with us this week because I think our handicappers are going to really sharpen their pencils and get red hot. We'll have Scotty M with us tomorrow, and he hasn't been with us the last couple of weeks, been under the weather. So hopefully he's feeling up to the task. I know he's going to be excited about, and I'm curious to see which way it goes with Indiana in their opening round playoff game coming up on Saturday, as Indiana is getting a bunch of points in this one. What is it, 7 and a hook that Indiana is getting as they are playing Indiana. Notre Dame. Wow, that's a tough call. Indiana and Notre Dame. Fighting Irish been blowing people out ever since their loss to Northern Illinois, and Indiana's had their ups and downs. They did get exposed a little bit against Ohio State. So Scotty M, who's been riding that crest, the magic carpet that was Indiana throughout the early stages of the college football season, should join us tomorrow. We'll have Troy West, who's been red hot, and he'll join us on Wednesday. Thursday, Mike Jones, and Friday, the professor, who hopefully will remain hot on his college football picks. I think we did get buried on some of his college basketball plays, but he was suggesting these games to you before he actually had access to the lines. But that being said, I don't think it went well with his Friday basketball picks, but I'm assuming he's going to come up real big here as he did the week before on college football. So stick with us all throughout the week. We'll try to make you some money. For the people on at Bet Online, I did want to mention this. If you were touching in boxes as to who has the edge, as we were talking about when they do the grades in the post and the aftermath, post-game analysis of how certain teams are doing in your hometown. Giants, as I said, with 3 Fs and a C. And you're saying or something, that's an accomplishment that they got to see on special teams. But with this Bill Belichick thing, a lot of conversation about that over the weekend. How's he going to do? I mean, how can he lose the intangible aspect of games when at 72 years old, he's banging a 24-year-old? And it goes totally against our equation, which would be if you're going to date a younger woman as a man, and I don't know if women use the same application, but if you're going to date a younger woman as a man, you take, if you want to find a cutoff, the Mendoza line, you take your age and divide it in half. So Belichick's 72, divide that in half. That would be 36. And then you add 7 years. And don't ask me why this formula works, but it's an empirical truth. So Belichick should never be with anybody at 72 years old that's under 43. We're talking very questionable activity. If you're perusing the women that are 43 and under at a 72-year-old, as a 72-year-old man. But you would have to think that because he's got this 24-year-old girlfriend, he always wins the intangibles. Every check mark and every box of every game North Carolina plays that references intangibles, boom, Belichick every time. That he can go that far under. I mean, think about that. He's 19 years under the number for the normal formula for dating younger women. So, thought I would leave you with that, and also with the very puzzling thoughts about tonight's game. I don't know where you stand on these two games, but wow, I mean, you have to have some guts to lay any money on the Bears, even getting the 7 points. And my normal tendency would be to bet anything I had against the Raiders. So maybe getting 5 and a hook at home, that they can stay with what has been a Falcons team that has not been as sharp as they were early in the season when they thought people thought that they were actually going to do something. So we'll see. Good luck with your wagers tonight. We'll join you tomorrow with Scotty M, zeroing a little bit more closely and get involved in these college football playoff games that are coming up and maybe some of the bowl games as well. For the people that bet online, nofilter.net, and of course, Greenlight Ventures. I'm Jeff DeForrest. Thanks much for tuning in to this edition of Bury Your Bookie.